In 4.9, we're going to be talking about finding equivalent forms of fractions in decimals, and then to order those fractions in decimals. So let's look at an example of how to convert a decimal to a fraction. And so we have 28 thousandths. And so since we say 28 thousandths, then that means that it's 28 over 1,000. And when we look at our greatest common factor that we can factor out to simplify this, well, 28 and 1,000, I see they're both even. So I could divide each one by 2, and that would work. 28 over 1,000, and divide each one by 2, and I get 14 over 500. But then I have to factor out again another 2, and I get 7 over 250. 7 is prime, so I can't factor anything else out. Or, since I did that twice, I could simply say 28 over 1,000 and factor out a 4, dividing each numerator and denominator by 4, and I end up with the same 7 over 250. So the greatest common factor of 28 and 1,000 is 4. So 28 thousandths is equal to 7 over 250. Let's take a second look at another example of writing a fraction as a decimal. So we need to have at least 3/4 of a pound of dried apricots for a recipe. You find a bag that contains 8/10 of a pound. Is this enough? To write 3/4 as a decimal, divide 3 by 4. Well, we should understand that 3 over 4, 3/4, is 0.75. Since 4 goes into 3 0 times, 4 goes into 30 7 times, 7 times 4 is 28, subtract, you get 2. We bring down that 0, and we get 20. 4 times 5 is 20, so we have 0 left over. So 3/4 is the same as 0.75. Another method would be to use a calculator, but a calculator might not always be handy. However, 3 divided by 4 is 0.075, or 0.75. So since 0.75, make that look like a decimal point real. So 0.75 is less than 0.8. There is enough in the 8/10 of a pound bag. So that is kind of a basic one. So let's give you a chance to practice on your own, and we'll check here in a second. So go ahead and pause and practice, and we'll check in. Alright, so our quick check for number 1, write 5 and 8/100 as a mixed number. So that would be 5 and we say 8/100, so that would be 8 over 100. But then I need to simplify, because 8 over 100 is not in simplest terms. I can reduce that, and I can factor out a 2 because they're both even, or I could look at it and say, well, 8 and 100, 4 goes into both of those, so that could simplify down to 5 and 2/25. And for number 2, you answered 35 out of 40 questions correctly. Your friend answered 0.8 of the questions correctly, or 8/10. Who scored higher? So we need to convert our 35 out of 40 into a decimal. So 35 over 40, we have to think of that as saying 35 divided by 40. 35 divided by 40. And actually, let's do that with a little bit more space down here. Make sure I rewrite the problem correctly as well. So 35 divided by 40. 40 doesn't go into 35 evenly, so I need to add a decimal point. So I'm going to put a decimal point after the 5 and put it in my quotient up above right away as well, so I don't forget. So it goes into 35 0 times. And when I put my decimal point, I put a 0 after that 5. 40 now goes into 350 8 times, because I know that 8 times 40, or 8 times 4 is 32, so 8 times 40 is 320. I subtract, and I get 30. I add another 0 and bring it down. So 40 goes into 300 7 times, because 7 times 4 is 28. 7 times 40 would be 280. And if I can, I'd have to move this, so let's move all of this up just a tad. Ran out of space, so we're going to bring this up. There we go. Power of technology. So 4 goes in. 4 times 7 is 280. I subtract, and I have 20. I add my 0 and bring it down. 40 goes into 200 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20, so 5 times 40 is 200. I subtract and I get 0. So comparing 35 over 40, which would be equal, that 35 over 40 equals 0.875 or 875 thousandths. Well, that's definitely greater than 0.8. So who scored higher? Our 35 out of 40. Third example. This is where we need to compare in order, but we have both fractions and decimals. So the decimals, that's the easy stuff that we can compare. We just go look by place value. Now we need to convert our fractions into decimals. So writing 2 and 2/3. Well, I know it's going to be 2 point something. So I need to convert 2/3 into a decimal. So 2 divided by 3. 3 doesn't go into 2, so I added my 0, added my decimal point. 3 goes into 20 6 times, and I get 18. I subtract, I get 2. Well, this is now going to be a complete vicious cycle of having repeating 6. So this will be 2.6, and I put a bar over that 6 because it's repeating. It never ends. 2/3 is a repeating decimal. Alright, so now I have 3 and 9/20. So I know it's going to be 3 point something because that is a whole number 3. And then I look at 9 over 20. So I'm going to say, well, let me move this part. Oh, not that. Let's just take our, I'm going to erase my work right here and start again with 9 divided by 20. So 9 divided by 20. 20 doesn't go into 9, so it's 0, and I add my decimal point. Add my 0 here. 20 goes into 90 4 times. 4 times 20 is 80. I subtract and I get 10. I add a 0 and bring it down. 20 goes into 100 5 times. And it goes in there and there's no remainder. So 3 and 9/20 would be the same as 3.45. And let's make that look like a 4. So now I need to compare my decimals. So when I have 3.4, 2 and 6 repeating, 3.45 and 2.6, and I'm going to write this from least to greatest. So the least one of all of those is my 2 and 6/10, 2.6, which the next one is 2 and 6/10. But that 6/10 is repeating, followed by 3.4, and then I have 3.45. That's the greatest. So the order is, and I don't write it in decimal for each one of these because I need to use the fraction that it gave in the original problem. So the order would be 2.6, 2 and 2/3, 3.4, and 3 and 9/20 being the greatest. Alright, now we have a quick check. So this is where you go ahead and practice and pause, and I will check in with you in a bit. Alright, so we are writing 2 and 2/3, 3 and 1/5, 1.8, and 2.7 in order from least to greatest. So we should know that 2 and 2/3 from that previous problem. Well, that was 2 and 6/10 repeating. So we don't have to worry about dividing that out again. We just did it. So now we need to look at our other fraction, and we have 3 and 1/5. So I know it's going to be 3 point something, but I need to convert that 1/5 into a decimal. Well, 1 divided by 5 I can't put 5 into 1, so it's 0, add my decimal point, and in my 0, 5 goes into 10 twice. I subtract, I have 0 remainders, so 3 and 1/5 would be the same as 3.2. Now I have all of them in decimals. So now I can compare and order them. And looking at, I have 1 and 8/10. That's the least, because the whole number 1. That's the least, followed by 2 and 2/3, because I have 2.6 repeating, which is going to be less than 2.7. And then the greatest of all of these is my 3 and 1/5, because 3.2 is greater than 2.7. That's the end of finding equivalent forms of fractions and decimals and then ordering them.